Hello, this is Shawn Thompson. I'm the Finance Director for Northern California SBDC Network, and we're going to be talking about the SBDC budget modification process to ensure that the budgets that we have in place are correct for closing out the grant year. So one of the things we need to talk about is prior written approval of the lead center and in which circumstances this is going to be required. When there's a budget transfer that exceeds a 10% variance and constitute a change of more than $5,000, the lead center needs to be contacted. So an example might be that you thought you were going to hire someone under personnel earlier in the year, and that got held up by your host for some reason, and you ended up being able to hire a temporary person or a contracted person, and so maybe some funds moved from personnel and fringe down to contractual or down to consulting, and so there would be a variance that's going between budget items, so between the cost categories of personnel and fringe to contractual or consulting. Another one is travel. This is one that SBA really pays attention to, and you need to ensure that if you are traveling out of the Northern California region and out of the state of California, that it's either in your original proposal or that you notify us prior to travel so that we can put it form into the district office formally requesting travel. SBA wants to know what the business purpose is for you expending Northern California funds to go outside of Northern California. And then hiring a new service center director. We've had situations in the past where a director has left or retired and a host has done a hiring process that hasn't involved the lead center. And the lead center is required to sign off on a new director, and therefore they need to be part of the hiring process. So let's talk about the budget transfer between cost categories, because this can be confusing. So budget transfers that exceed 10% of the total approved budget across all cost categories, and these are personnel, fringe, travel, supplies, equipment, other, and across all the sources of funds, which are the SBA and match funding. Program income isn't shown in the SBDC budget, so that's not a column when you look at your contracted budget that you actually see, so we're not going to include that. But what you would be looking at is your cost categories all the way to the right-hand column across all your different funding sources if it exceeds 10%. So if you, just for simple math, had $50,000 in federal funding and then $50,000 in match funding, and so that made up $100,000. So your whole budget was $100,000. And then that means you would have 10% variance that would be allowable, so that would be $10,000. And that means that you could go over on a cost category, on one cost category, by up to $10,000, or you could go over by a combined combination of $10,000. For example, maybe $5,000 in personnel and $3,000 in fringe. That gets you to $8,000 and $2,000 in supplies. And so that would be the combination of $10,000 across 3 different cost categories. What you are not going to take into account is, of course, when you overspend one cost category, you usually underspend another cost category. Don't take that into account. That was confusing to me in the past, but if you did positive, negative, you would come out at 0 all the time, and that doesn't serve any purpose. So SBA is trying to ensure that they are notified if you're significantly varying from the cost plan. They don't mind if you underspend, they just mind if you overspend, and they want to have prior notification. So how to request prior approval. The subrecipient must submit a letter of request with justification to the lead center prior to expending any of the funds involved. So this can be an email, and a lot of times it's a discussion that the service center, the director, someone calls and we talk about a certain situation has come up, and does this sound like it's SBDC related? Does this sound like it's okay? And we'll talk it through, and yes, it does sound okay. And so we'll get something in writing for both of our files, and we'll keep a copy at the lead center, and the service center should keep a copy. And when it's time to do the budget modification process at the end of the year, then you want to look back at any of those documents and make sure that, you know, if you had 2 or 3 items that you got prior approval for, that those changes are reflected in your final modification. And then, so you're going through the year, you're contacting the lead center about anything unexpected that comes up. And then in October, we do a formal budget modification process to show all those cumulative changes, and we'll do a formal modification to the contract so that the budget will be kind of on target for the end of the grant. And some other reasons to complete the budget modification process. If the federal award amount is anticipated to increase or decrease. And so if something changed with your host that maybe you're not going to spend all the federal funds, maybe you got so much other funding that it's really not feasible to spend all the federal funds, then the lead center would want to know as soon as possible so that we could allocate those funds to another service center that could spend those funds. Then maybe you're getting an increase. Maybe the lead center has offered an incentive for sending people for a professional development opportunity or different reasons. And so that would be another reason to do a modification. And then SBDC has this this lovely rule that when total indirect costs, which means the amount that's reimbursed with the federal funds and the waived indirect costs, so the combination increase by even $1, even a cent, that we need to have a modified budget. So, of course, if your federal funding increases, then your indirect increases because it's a percentage of your spending. So every time you spend $1 of federal funds or spend $1 of cost match, your indirect automatically goes up. So just don't forget that piece. You might look at your direct costs and you don't think that it's rising to the level of needing to do a budget modification, but don't forget how that indirect cost is affected. Another reason you would need to do a modification is, let's say that you didn't budget anything for supplies, and then you realized that the director needs a new computer all of a sudden. And so then if you need to put a dollar amount in a line item that had $0 in that line item, we need to do a budget mod. So the time frame for doing the budget modifications is in October. We're trying to align it with when you're preparing your July through September invoices. So then you have 3/4 of your expenses already known. So you're just guesstimating your last quarter, which would be October through December. So the lead center will send out the templates and the instructions no later than October 1st. Then by the middle of October, we're wanting to see a draft, an Excel template back to the lead center. And we're going to be looking that over and comparing it to the third quarter invoice, which is also due at that same time, and reviewing it and seeing if, just saying personnel, if you had $100,000 budgeted in your modification and we look at your most recent quarterly invoice and that says that you're claiming $100,000, well, how are you going to pay for the last quarter of the year? So now we're going to have a question about, you know, are you going to shut down for the last quarter? How are you going to pay for that? Maybe you're going to pay for that out of program income, which doesn't show up. But we'll have questions trying to look at your year-to-date expenses and thinking that we should see an estimate of 25% additional budget to get you through the end of the year. And then by the end of October, we hopefully have gotten back to you at the lead center and said, yes, this all looks good. We've talked about it, and that you can have your host sign off on the budget modification. And then the lead center will start working on the formal contract modification that our host, Humboldt State Sponsored Programs Foundation, will send out for signature, and then the contract will officially be modified for the end of the year. So there's 5 parts to the modification process. It's really similar to the proposal, but shortened. So you have the cover sheet, and that gives the service center and the host information so that we know that we're issuing the contract to the correct place. The host needs to sign that. Then there's the budget certification, and that should be updated with the accurate cash match sources and in-kind sources of match for the end of the year. That also needs to be signed by the host. Then there's the detailed budget justification that would get updated from what was in the current contract and update it with what are going to be the actuals or as close to the actuals for the end of the year. And then a budget narrative. So you're giving a line item description for each of the expenses. And then this is a kind of auto-calculated sheet that's included that's showing the waived indirect amount. So we'll look at the template and kind of go through that together. Okay. All right, So you can select your center's name. So in this case, it's Alameda. And then in this case, we also have a stipend for sending people to the Professional Development Conference in Sacramento this year. So you can select how many people are going to be attending, and there's an extra $500 per attendee. And that shows the allocation there. And if you put 2 people, that would go up. If you put 0, it would go there. So let's stick with 1. And then you'll go to the next tab, the cover page, and this is where you put your host organization information. So right now, Alameda is being hosted by HSU, SPF, and you put the mailing address, and the service center name would be Alameda SBDC, and you could put the mailing address there, and the director's name, and then down here we put the host signatory, Casey Flynn currently, and she's the interim. When I type in in these other places, and so then you can skip the waived indirect calculator. It's an auto tab, and go on to the next red tab. This is where you would put in your cash match. So this would be maybe the state funding. It includes the name of the funding and the grant name. So maybe GoBiz fiscal year 17-18, capital infusion counseling, and if it was a $50,000 contract, maybe you spent half of that in 2018, and this is a pull down, and that yes, it's secured, and this would not be applicable in that case, and this would be July through June. And to be more specific, July 2017, June 2018. I know some people did get extensions on this, so it might say September, so it depends on your circumstance. And then there might be another one that says tape. It would say fiscal year 18-19, and expansion, and if it was 100,000, and that you're going to just spend 25,000 because it only starts in October, and is the funding secure yet? Maybe no, because we haven't heard, you don't have the contract yet, but you're expecting to have the contract in, let's say by the end of October. Should be in place by then, and then it would be October 2018 through September 2019. And it should be expansion of training and counseling. So you just go down, put your local funding, and list all those sources. And then maybe there's some donations, donated training space that you might use. And then this will fill in automatically from the budget when we fill out the next tab. So then we'll go to the next tab and do the budget justification. You would put in the director and Smith, Joan, and that the salary is maybe 85, and that the time based would be 100%, and maybe out of 100%, the SBA is going to have 50,000, and then maybe the rest will go from the host, let's say. So it would just be and so then you would want to put in the benefits for the SBA column and the benefits for the host column. They need to stay together. And travel, fill that in. Supplies, contractual, just a reminder, that's all non-client services. Anything related to clients, trainings, business advising goes under G. And then H would be anything else that's not covered. One thing about facilities, so if it is a lease for a main office, that goes under line 80 and below. Anything that's a temporary renting a space for the day for a workshop would go up here in training facilities because that's not having a long-term lease. It's just kind of a technicality. And this should reflect your accurate indirect rate agreements. If it's not, please contact us and we'll fix your template. So then after this is completed, then you can look at this narrative instruction sheet, and this will give you directly from the program announcement what's required for each cost category. So for personnel, we need a list of names and titles of all personnel charged to federal and non-federal funds. For vacancies, show the position title and budget justification. If additional space is needed to explain the cost, include a budget narrative. Use the personnel list to show the annual salary, number of months, etc. So the personnel list is actually something the Lead Center submits. But so it goes down and tells you everything that's needed for each cost category, and you need to ensure that that's either supplied in the detailed budget or in the budget narrative. So I think that covers everything. For each line item that has a dollar amount, we need to have a description, and you don't just copy what you already put. Like, don't just say, director making 85,000, working 100%, but maybe saying that the director is working on such and such initiatives, providing day-to-day supervision in the office, doing 20% counseling or direct services, something a little more explanatory. I think that's it. And please let me know if you have specific questions for your program, and we can always walk through it and set up a time to go over your specific budget and needs. Thank you so much for attending today, and you can always reach out and contact me at Shawn, S-H-A-W-N, at humboldt.edu, or phone number is 707-826-3974. Thank you.